changes that I've made is kind of a direct result of sitting with my thoughts and speaking about them. I've never been much of a say what I'm thinking sort of person, and I have done quite a bit of that now. So it's things like I would have never done through poetry. I now just, if there's something in my head, I write it down instead. And I've had, opportunities to share those poems out. I've, created poetry night out. That came as kind of a direct result of it.
Slowing down, just enjoying every little aspect of what you're doing.
I didn't make any specific changes. I kind of made changes around prioritising things for myself. I got involved in a local writing group and started to explore that a little bit more in my own time. Made some changes to some of the community work that I was doing, because it was all very much about bringing people together and events and doing things as a collective, which obviously we couldn't do. But some of the stuff that we did still showed that there was a need. So off the back of the collections we used to do for hygiene products and things like that, we actually formalised and became part of the hygiene bank during lockdown. So that was a real positive that came out of it. And there's a small team of us volunteers now that continue that on and work on that on a more permanent basis.
Well, the main thing that changed was I closed my business. I would have been able to recover from it. I think, I would have just been able to sit it out, and the government grants and stuff, were really helpful with that. But what it did actually do was give me a chance to sit back and think, am I actually happy doing this? Is this what I want to do now? So the biggest change was that I decided to close my business and completely retrain for a new career. So I suppose it was a bit like kind of wiping the slate clean, really. And just that opportunity to sort of have a bit of breathed space to think. I think particularly when you're self-employed, you're just constantly working and never turning jobs down if you can help it, because you don't know when the next work's coming. So I hadn't had any time in that sort of previous 5 years to really sort of take stock of it and decide whether, where the business had gone was where I wanted it to go.
Not one. I don't think I did, no. No, just think I've become more unfit. Promised that I'll do more walking and I've done less, so no, I think I've got better on Zoom and social media and stuff as lockdown.
The monologue project with FFS at the studio, that was another thing where it was one of those topics that only came to me during lockdown, and I had to find a way to release it. It was the first time I ever spoke to anyone about it was during lockdown, and so it was kind of like a year on that I then went, well, here you go, here's the story, and I shared it with an audience. So I guess speaking is the main direct result.
When I first heard about Sarah Everard, my first response unfortunately was, oh no, not again. It just seems to keep happening and we just keep putting up with it. And I think that's why the response in the park was so huge. I think people had just had enough. But equally, I've heard that so many times, we've had enough. And for me, it's down to educating boys and men. This is a problem for men, not for women, and we need to work together and communicate better.
Yeah, it's just an ongoing issue. We have legislation and policies put in place for domestic violence and violence in the workplace, or harassment, or safety issues in the workplace or home, and it's seen as a breach of human rights. But violence in public place seems to be neglected, and there doesn't seem to be enough legislation or policies or respect by each other in the public spaces. Until we start getting respect instilled into people, I think safety issues in public places will just be an ongoing problem.
You don't necessarily feel terrified all the time, but it's that underlying fear that actually you're not as safe as you should be at night. I think probably from the age of mid-teens, I was holding my keys in my hand automatically when walking down dark streets. I think there is just that frisson, that feeling that actually we are still not where we need to be.
Yeah, the Sarah Everard thing was horrendous, and I think even more horrendous than, well, not more horrendous, I don't mean that, just as horrendous was the police reaction to the vigils. I thought that was just shocking, and I think, you know, that people put it down to they were breaking lockdown by going to the vigil. I think that people have been protesting against masks and lockdown and throughout, and had never been treated like that, and I just thought it was disgusting.
Safety is an issue. The news only covers a tiny amount of, you know, what is going on, the major issues at play. The fact that, you know, you do have to be careful. I'm terrified to walk alone by myself at night. Absolutely terrified. If I'm not talking to somebody whilst I'm in the dark, I do have that level of fear, because if I'm not speaking to somebody, I'm alone, if you know what I mean.
I was asked the question once, I think it was on the radio, and someone said, what would you do if for the night you knew you would be absolutely safe and there was no men on the streets? And that's, you know, not to tar all men with the same brush, but just for one night there was no men on the streets, and you could do whatever you want. And so many people on the radio, and the first thing in my mind as well was like, I'd walk in the park at night and look at the stars. And just the fact that that's something that isn't a given right to you on any evening means that we're not quite there yet. So when we can walk in the park and look at the stars, we're there.
Oh, I think with the safety issue, we've had another tragic incident happen very recently, when this was already something that, as a group of women that I'm involved in, you know, we've looked at previously and we talk about quite often. I think again what this highlights is that, you know, there's more that needs to be done, regardless of what we're told, regardless of this constant narrative that we're fed from being really young, that it's down to us with regards to what we wear, what time we go out, staying where it's lit, staying in groups, texting when we get there, all these different things. You know, we saw it with the Sarah Everard murder at the beginning of the year, and again with Sabine and Nessa, is that, you know, these were people on regular routes. They were dressed in you know, a way that, you know, should be deemed, not that that should be a reason anyway, but should be deemed, you know, provocative. They weren't doing anything out of the ordinary. They were just going about the business, and I think that's why, you know, each time something like this happens, it causes such an outcry, because basically we can't do anymore. This needs to be a bigger conversation now. It needs to be a bigger conversation for everybody to make the streets safer for everybody. You know, women can't do this alone, because we already know what we're told to do, and that still isn't always enough to keep some of these young women safe. And I think that's why you know, we really need to draw as much attention to this and start to have it as an issue taken seriously.
I think in as far as safety goes, I don't think we'll ever be 100% safe, but I think the more that we act on how we feel about the treatment of women, you know, any crime against a woman the woman gets judged for it. If she's murdered, if she's raped, there's always, what was she doing there, what was she wearing, how much has she had to drink. And I think as long as that goes on, it won't change anything. So I think that's a conversation that needs to be had between a lot of people, and hopefully with the next generation, so that you know, it's not, doesn't carry on through the generations.
I know, even like post-lockdown and just like walking down the street, the amount of abuse I've received as a woman for being a woman by people as young as like 10 years of age. I've had it whilst I've been walking to work. I've had it where I've just tried, just a few times of going to work, another one just round the corner, and some old man started following me and saying stuff, so I had to change direction. I didn't want to lead them to my workplace, so I went to the shop first before I went to my workplace. It is a major issue.
You see things like the attack on Sarah Everard, and then also the response, the public response was of course an outcry, and there was a lot of people who went down there to protest and to raise the issue of safety on the streets for women, for marginalised societies. But the police response itself on the night was actually pretty brutal towards women.